In my studio is my world. It's my safe space. It's my model of the way that I want to see the world and how I create it. My studio is an imagined space of architecture. It's an imagined space of psychology. It's a living extension of my body. My studio is myself. It is who I am. When I'm not existing in this realm anymore, I would hope that my essence would still be evident beyond my body there. My name is William J. O'Brien. I'm based in Chicago. I'm an artist who mostly uses drawing, but my work extends into ceramics and mixed media and sculpture. I like to think of myself as a painter of materials. You can experiment in drawing very easily and as well with clay. That all has to do with also the history of drawing and also the history of ceramics. Someone told me that a good drawing is actually open-ended. When you look at drawing, it allows for you to have a good imagination, and I do believe in the same thing about ceramics. It's a way of performance, and it's actually a way to experiment. When you walk into my studio, I show emerging artists that I support, and I like to have that as being the first thing that people see when they come into my space. My studio is also where I transform darkness into beauty. It is also a place where I contend with difficult circumstances and try to understand and work through them, obstacles as path. My studio is also an intention of the way that I'd like to see myself, even though there might be sides of myself that I'm not comfortable with. It's a very good place to experiment and to work through difficult things. I keep saying safe space, but it really is that. It's a container to sort of exist in the world as being a place where maybe we couldn't do that outside. Usually it feels like myself. It depends on how I'm feeling that day. I think it's a mirror. So when I come in, there are days where I feel good. Oftentimes when I struggle with various things in my life, whether it's art world stuff, institutional stuff, it's nice to come into my studio because I actually feel like it reassures me that I'm doing the right thing. I have two studios that I work in. I have a home studio, which is where I do mostly drawings, and I look at that studio as being where I work alone without assistance and where I experiment and actually make a lot of my drawings and plan things. My other studio is where I work on sculptures, bigger works, things that I can't actually physically move on my own. The other studio is mostly used for, part of it is for ceramics, the other part is for mixed media works and painting. In 2012, I had a significant studio fire where I lost everything, and nothing survived in that. I was flying from Cleveland into Chicago, and I was sitting on a plane next to a Hindu man who took my palm and said, "You can't control the things that happen to you in life, but you can control with what you do with these obstacles." When I landed, my studio manager told me that my studio had completely burned to the ground. My new studio I was attracted to because there are no real artists in the building. It's mostly small businesses. But the main thing was that there are florists in my building. So every time coming in, I get to see fresh flowers. And I think that makes a big difference for me, just connecting with nature. The fact that my neighbor is making floral arrangements. It's an uplifted space. You might smell clay, dust. You probably would hear conversation. I'm a big fan of sugar and laughter. So for the people who work in my studio, I think sweets, caffeine, the smell of tea, coffee is important. But then also, it is like a studio, it's movement. There's a lot of activities going on. Someone told me to be very suspicious of people who don't enjoy music. And I think it's important that music is very close to your heart. And they say that music is the biggest offering you can make to the world. It's the highest level of expression. I'm trying to think of listening to now in this studio. I'm like, I connect a lot to like emerging music. I've been listening to actually Alice Coltrane a lot recently. And it depends on the work that I'm making also. But oftentimes I was telling people that recently, when I'm working in the studio, it's complete silence, mostly because the world is so loud and so fast that I've really been just enjoying sitting in there by myself. A good day in studio is where I can come in and I can work early in the morning, uninhibited, but also have time to really allow myself to space to evaluate what's going on. A good day in the studio for me would be being surprised. I think elements of spontaneity. Also maybe reconciling things that I have made that I thought were failures, actually having a new insight that actually are value. The work that I usually make that I have a resistance to, I find is the work, and I think most artists will be making in 10 years. And sometimes when you see it, you think it's gross or bad or ineffective, but actually I think it's an insight into where you're going. So having insight is a good day in the studio. A bad day in the studio would be, I'm trying to think, a bad day in the studio would be the world affecting me too much that I find a sense of value in why I'm there, where I actually have a lot of doubt, where I'm experiencing doubt. The advice I would give to artists would be yourself. And that question of being yourself is very complicated, but I think being a good artist is genuinely being yourself. And there are times when people are going to embrace that, and there are times where people are going to challenge you on that. But in the long run, being yourself is really what is going to be the most satisfying and create the most value for you in the studio. Oftentimes when emerging artists are coming out, there is this question of how do I make this happen? I come from the school of if you make it, they will come. And sometimes the audience is not the audience you want, but if you make enough of something, your audience will come to you. And I think that sometimes can be more empowering because for a lot of emerging artists, entering the art world is very intimidating and it's not a place that feels very accessible. So I do feel like sometimes the only thing that artists have control over is actually making the work. We don't have control over if the work sells, we don't have control over where it goes, but there's one space we do have control over. So my advice to emerging artists is to own that and make it yourself. And do not have anybody influence you and tell you to do things differently because you will regret it later.